Thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of Get Your Fill, Financial Independence and Long Life, where we strive for ways and discover ways to achieve those two goals, and we invite friends on to help us. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Kathleen Murphy, Kathleen E.R. Murphy. And she is the CEO of Market Me Too, which is a very cool executive. So she spent Savannah, start over. I forgot to mention that we have an editor, so when I do get myself all in a tangle, then we
Fabulous.
cut and start over. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, that doesn't happen in the video, so the video is going to have this whole Christmas steak at the beginning.
It's real life.
Welcome to another episode of Get Your Fill, Financial Independence and Long Life. I'm very honored and grateful that you're here, that of the 2 million podcasts out there for you to find, that you have managed to find this one. And I want to make sure that this is worth your while. And to celebrate that and to be sure that we give you the absolute best, most exciting information in this hour, I want to introduce to you Kathleen Murphy. She, in 2018, after spending over 25 years in an executive marketing position in the technology industry, Kathleen decided to pivot her career. So from that point on, she just said, all right, this is it. I'm going to become a published author. So since 2018, she's written 2 books, which she's going to tell us about. She's a speaker. She's a Gallup certified Strengths Finder coach, which you're definitely going to want to hear about. She's the founder and CEO of Market Me Too. And we're going to tell you all about how to reach her and get all that information for her. She specializes in helping workforce and sports team clients to deeply understand their own talents, which is part of what the Gallup certified Strengths Finder coach, that part of what that is all about, and to appreciate their colleagues and teammates' innate talents. And this is something that, every marriage should have as well, because if you know what the other person's strengths are and you know what your own strengths are, you can help each other to get the best from each other. So she's going to tell us through all that. And her coaching systems enable work and sports team leaders and individuals on their teams to feel more motivated, engaged, and united. And this results in the people on these teams to feel more appreciated and valued. And that's what we all want. And the leaders of the teams to see increased team performance metrics. And even if you're not a sports leader, if you're a family, if you're a person who interacts with any other individual, you're going to find this conversation really valuable. So Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to pick your brain.
Oh, thanks. I'm happy that you've asked me to be on here today, because very often I get a blank stare when I tell people that I'm a Gallup Strengths Coach. They look at me and just kind of say, what? What does that mean? I think it's the best kept secret in the last 50 years, because Gallup has been around that long with their Strengths Finders assessment to tell people what their top 5 strengths are. There are 34 possible ones, but I focus typically with clients on their top 5.
So tell us more about that, the Gallup Strengths. I am fortunate to have actually taken that test myself.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
So tell us more about, folks who have never heard of it and who are giving their radio or their phone the blank stare right now. Tell us how it works.
Absolutely. So it's pretty easy. There are a couple steps that you need to take. And the first one is to queue up a code so you can take an assessment, which takes about 40 minutes online, to go through and answer a series of questions. And then at the end of the 40 minutes, you're going to get 2 digital reports that are going to tell you about your strengths. Some people will opt to know what all 34 of them are, and that costs a little bit extra money. But I tell people that for $20, it's going to be the best $20 investment they've ever made in themselves, because they'll find out what those top 5 strengths are. And what that means is when you find out what they are, you're going to then do one, you're going to name your strengths, which you've already done as part of the Gallup training process. You're going to be able to claim your strengths and work towards understanding them better. And then the third thing that you're going to do with them is to intentionally set some up goals for you to be able to leverage those strengths to make whatever it is that you're challenging yourself with happen based on those strengths that you have. The 34 strengths get put into 4 different buckets. So the buckets are executing strengths, strategic strengths, relationship strengths, and influencing strengths. And the odds of you having the same strength numbers as somebody else is 1 in 33 million. And
Wow.
yes, you heard that right. So I have yet to find my strength twin. And there are some people out there that have a few strengths in common with me, but nobody in the same order. And then if I look at the 34 profile, there's no way that they do. But the whole concept for this Gallup Strength Finders is to focus people on not what's wrong with them, but to focus on what's right with them, and to put your attention and your energy towards becoming, excellent, going from great to excellent with your talents. And you can only really do that when you know what they are.
It's so common, I think, for us to see the areas where we are not good. Like, oh, I really need to work on balancing my checkbook because I'm really bad at that, right? And we spend all of our energy working on our weaknesses.
That's right. And so the cool thing in families, sometimes I work with families, I work with many teams and individuals too, but when I work with families, what I'll tell them is that they'll want to partner with somebody in their family who potentially is better at a particular strength than they are, so that they can leverage one another's talents. And that's what people should be naturally doing when they're on a team anyways. So when you think about a family unit, they need to depend on one another, or should be depending on one another. And wouldn't it be great if they were aware of one another's skills, so that that could be the process, and so that people aren't arguing about, you do it, I'm terrible at this, or, you're better at that than I am.
And also, I think it's our strengths and the areas in which we naturally gravitate are also going to give some insight into our personalities and how we think. Right. And I think if you understand someone's thought process, you might not be as frustrated with them when they don't think exactly the same way that you think, or whatever. And we think that would be another benefit. Right?
That's absolutely the case. I recently just finished 3 projects, 2 with very large corporations, and they each had about a dozen-ish people on those teams. And another one was with a smaller business that had 11 people involved in that project with me. But what they were striving to achieve was to get to know one another better, because especially since this past year, they haven't seen one another for a while.
Right.
And there were new people added to their team, so they didn't really know those people. And yet they were being asked to work collaboratively with one another. And yet, how could they really do that really well if they've barely had any time to really get to know one another? So this project fast tracked all of them, even the ones that have known each other for years. A number of them had been working with one another for 5-10 years. And what they found out, fascinating, was that they really didn't know each other as well as they thought that they did. And so I took them through some exercises to try to reveal what they did know about one another, but then in fact to showcase and share the benefits of the particular talents of all the members on the team. And it was so much fun and so fascinating.
Oh, I would think that would be such a great exercise for anybody who you interact with. Like you say, for families, it would be could be a game changer for families and for groups like that where you're trying to get a project done. You might find that you're in a role, or that you thought you would, you could do, or you just evolved into it, and you actually would be better at this other role and be so much stronger there. And you didn't know.
Exactly. And one of the things that I shared with all 3 of those teams was that oftentimes we think, you heard the comment opposites attract, and you don't always think necessarily that it would be a great idea to potentially work with someone who's opposite from you. And when in fact, that's just not the case at all. You can potentially come to a much better solution when you're working as a team, when you do work with somebody who has an opposite particular talent from you, and opposite talent by way of the Gallup Strengths Finder, 34 strengths. So what I did was for each of these teams is I showed them pairings, kind of like food and wine pairings, in terms of who should be working with one another on projects, and or for considerations of going forward to work with one another. And it was fascinating because most of the time they said, my gosh, we never would have imagined some of these people working with one another. And now they're going to have some new ways to leverage talent on their team that they never did before. And an example of that might be, say, somebody on their team that they didn't know that was analytically minded, and yet they're having to work on a project that requires a heightened amount of analysis, and they need somebody to maybe come in at the end and take a look at the analysis that's been done, but they need a fresh set of eyes, because the people that have been working on it that are sort of the analytical people would normally just, sign off on it. But if they could bring in one of their team members that doesn't normally do that, have them participate in the project, they're going to get a much better result. And other information is going to be maybe caught in terms of some opportunities of what they could share with the people that they're going to be presenting the information to, just as one small example.
Yeah, and also because people are so different and they hear things different, they learn things differently. If the analytical people are presenting to the emotional people, they're just not going to resonate with them. They're not going to be received well, and not going to be speaking the same language. So you're absolutely right.
That's so true. And when I work with families, it's really fun because I get to kind of represent and show them all different kind of ways, because I'm mindful of what you just brought up, the fact that people learn differently. So some people are visual learners, some people are kinesthetic, they like to touch things, some people are auditory learners, and then there are a couple of other sort of learning modalities. But just to cover basically those three, I make sure that when I'm working with them that I'm covering all of those, because I want them to fully embrace and understand the benefits of the talents amongst their organization, whether that be a family organization or a team.
Yeah, that it's very powerful, this, knowledge and insight into others.
It really is. And I wish I had found out about this information long before I did. I found out about Gallup 10 years ago, and it was purely by chance that I did. I was walking down the hallway of a tech company that I was working at and saw this really interesting kind of what looked like a map on the wall, but it had names, and it was a big chart with all kinds of columns and everything. And I recognized some of the names and figured out that they probably belonged to the sales team. And so I started asking questions and said, what is that chart all about? And come to find out, it was the Strengths Finders results for two sales teams that they were blending together, that they were going to have to start working with one another, whereas they were fiercely competing with one another a week before that.
Oh
But
boy.
the founder of the company decided that he wanted them to blend. So they said, oh my gosh, how do we blend two highly competitive teams like this? So they went through the exercise of using the Strengths Finders to kind of level set everybody by, first of all, having everybody understand what one another's talents were. So it's kind of like, I give the example of, most people have maybe an X-ray ability of seeing what other people are all about. But with the Strengths Finder, it's all about giving them an MRI version. You get to see a completely different dynamic of an individual and the talents that they bring out. And it's really uniting. And it's really disarming. And especially when I'm working with either sports coaches or leaders of teams, one of the things that I work with them on is to understand the how to leverage this information, because it's so powerful and there's so much that you can do with it. It's just, the sky's the limit. And in terms of when I'm working with the coaches or the leaders, I'm always mainly focused on, well, what is it that you're trying to solve as a challenge? Because I'm usually brought in to work with teams for a reason or
Yeah.
two. Whether it's because of culture challenges, maybe leadership challenges, communication challenges, motivational challenges, it just goes on and on and on. It could be any number of different things, or it can be a series of things combined.
Do you find, I'm curious, where you work with different, do you find, like, for example, the sales team, that they would have similar strengths, and that certain positions on a sports team would have similar strengths? Is there any logic or?
Yeah, there are definitely some patterns that I see with teams. A couple of the teams that I work with recently were in the scientific space, if you will, and many of them had PhDs that were in the sort of biology, kind of chemistry fields, if you will. And when I looked at those profiles of their strengths versus, say, a corporate sales team, they were very different. And then when I compared that and contrasted it with, say, another team that I worked with last year, who was a public relations team, their skill sets were also entirely different. So those are just three different examples. And then toss in a team that I also worked with a month ago, where these people are advisors to parents and students who are trying to figure out, like, what's the best college or what's the best team for me to accept a sports scholarship onto. The makeup of that particular team was very similar, but very different from the scientific team, very different from the communication team, very different from the sales team. And then when I look at the sports teams that I work with, yes, they tend to also have some very similar characteristics. The sales teams, most of the people, not all of them, and what I also find with looking at maybe the sort of stack ranking of who's at the top, especially in sales, because they're so competitive, they're always, stack ranking in terms of, like, I'm the number one salesperson.
Right, right.
Not all the best, but many of the sales professionals will have competition as one of their strengths. They'll also have achiever, but not always. Like, some of the top talent salespeople I've seen were absent of both of those. And
Interesting.
yeah, so they were drawing on their talents from other areas to make them really successful. But I definitely see patterns, and when I look at um, you know, people, they Gallup doesn't necessarily subscribe to the fact that you should use the strengths finders for hiring purposes. You can use it to help inform you in terms of what kind of characteristics, in terms of strengths, is this person bringing to the team, but they don't necessarily advocate that you should use this to hire somebody or not hire them because they don't fit into a particular profile. That's really not what it's about. It's really to better inform you in terms of how to motivate that person, or how to help them become exceptional, and to put them on a path of succeeding versus, for example, I know that Facebook uses strength finders, and they have somebody take the strengths finders assessment when they come into the role. Now, what's interesting is that you would think, okay, that's great. So they'll say, okay, off you go. But yet, if they feel that some of those strengths aren't going to put that person in the path for success, they'll actually look at crafting a new role for that person that they
Wow,
brought onto their team.
interesting. That's, they obviously put a lot of, you know, strength, weight into this assessment.
They do, and there are other companies. Stryker, I know, does that. The University of Virginia uses this strength finders for all their freshmen, so their freshmen know for the next 4 years going through, and their professors will know what the talents are of those particular students. And I just think it's brilliant. It just makes so much sense to leverage the information that way.
Yeah, and you said something earlier about motivating people, and you're right.
Mhm.
Like, somebody who is motivated, some people would rather have, like, a new title. Some people would rather be celebrated at a big meeting and have everybody know what they've done, and someone else would just quietly like to be whatever, like just giving some more money or whatever.
Exactly. Just give me an envelope. Please don't like acknowledge my name. Please don't ask me to come up in front of the group. That's just awful for them. But yet they have different levels of motivation that somebody may not be aware of. And it can be devastating to that person that you are putting up on stage, and they're mortified that you've done that if you don't understand the characteristics behind their motivation and what makes them tick, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I actually want to kind of go off into talking about your books, because I know a lot of the people who are listening are aspiring authors. I think they're probably, most of us think we have a book in us somewhere.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I actually never did. What's
Yeah, there
ironic
were two at least.
well, and I'm writing my 6th one right now, and I should be publishing book 3 this year, and that's up for debate, because I didn't get a chance to publish book 2 last year because of COVID. My promotions got disrupted. But yeah, ask away in terms of whatever questions that you think might be interesting for me to answer for somebody as it relates to being an author.
Well, especially because you didn't think that you had a book in you. What made you initially start to write? The first one was the Wisdom Whisperer, right?
That's right, exactly. Yeah, it's this one right here. And it all started out during a small conversation that I was having with one of the sales team members that I was working with. And come to find out, we're talking about his numbers, and one thing led to the other. And we just got on a tangent about talking about what do we do outside of work. And come to find out, he was probably, for context setting, he was about 25, 26 years old, played hockey in college at the D1 level, and came across this really as a very highly confident young man. And it turns out that he was a poet and had published a poetry book. And I didn't even know that. And in the background, he was writing his first novel, which was, I think, a suspense novel. But I didn't know any of this. So I found that really fascinating. And I said, wow, that's so incredible that you're an author like that. And he said, well, you should be too. And I looked at him kind of funny, and he knew that I was looking at him funny. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, you teach us all the time. You're constantly mentoring us and teaching us what you know so that we can become better at what we do. And I said, okay, all right. So where are you going with this? And he said, well, it would be great if you could put that into writing so that you could share your information with more people. And I said, well, I don't understand. Like, how would I do that? And he said, well, I've got a blog and you could blog too. And so again, I looked at him kind of funny. And so one thing led to the other, and he encouraged me to set up a WordPress blog. So I got the courage up to consider what my first topic would be. And I penned it, put it into the blog. And then the scariest moment for me was hitting the go button, because I thought, well, all right, well, 2 things could happen. The best thing would be that maybe I hit the go button and no one sees it. And then I can say I did it and no one saw it, so I don't have to respond to anything. And there we go. I can just kind of, like go off
Check the box and never do that again.
Oh yeah, exactly. But what happened was that a few people saw it and they commented, and then I was just like, oh no, all right, well, that was good, I guess. And they liked it. So this young man encouraged me to keep writing. So when I got up to about, I don't know, 20, 25 stories, if you will, over the course of maybe, that was about half a year in. And my stories have a similar format. They are all about 2 pages in length and anywhere from 800 to 1,000 words, just to give somebody an idea of what I'm writing about. So I'd pick a topic and then I'd write about it. And they typically would come up with some suggestions in terms of ideas that they could apply to help them as it related to that topic. So I was, in other words, teaching them something. There was some actionable item that they could take away. And being a marketer by trade, I was kind of trained in terms of like, that's how you do it. That's how you think. And so I didn't know any better because I had never set out to write a book. So that was just my format. So I sort of by default came up with my own format based on the blogging style that I came up with. And so when I got to that 25 story mark, I started thinking about, all right, well, now what? And so I started talking to this young man about it again. And he said, well, why don't you think about becoming an author and putting these stories that you have into a book? And I said, that's really funny. I said, now what is, you told me I had to have a blog and I thought we were done there. And he's like, oh, no, 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 no. You're on your way to crafting your book. And I said, I don't even know what to do next. So he said, well, there are a couple different avenues that you can pursue. There's the publishing route and going out and selling your story to publishers, or you can self-publish like I did, he said. And I said, well, tell me more about the self-publishing aspect. That sounds interesting. And so he told me a little bit about how to go about doing that. So I followed his lead and then set myself up to self-publish. So I never even pursued looking to talk to a publisher because that really wasn't my intent. My intent was just to put my information out there and to also have some control over the content without somebody telling me what I could write about or what I couldn't write about and all kinds of other constraints that I imagined in my mind. And if a publisher was working with me, they would tell me I could and couldn't do it. And I thought that'd be dreadful. So I said, I want some creative freedom on this. So I'm going to just do this myself. So I thought, well, how many stories do I have to actually create a book? So in my mind, magically, I thought the number was 100 stories. I thought that was a good number. So I, set out to write these 100 stories, and I wrote these 100 stories. And then I decided, okay, well, now I need to have somebody edit them because you can't edit your own work. And I actually, the way that I write, my style is a little unusual. I do just one pass with my writing. So I write something and I'll literally hit the spell check, and that's my one pass. That I'm done. I don't go in and correct anything beyond that. So there's an opportunity there for an editing assignment to come in and clean up my work. And so I had to then go out and find an editor. And I was looking to talk to a number of different people, and it turns out that I found 2 editors, and I enlisted the help of 3 of my friends who have journalism degrees to read my content because I wanted my content to be really clean. Now, one of my editors also served as my publisher in terms of giving me guidance in terms of what to do, in terms of the cover or back cover, all the things that I just didn't know anything about that I had to do. Come up with my table of contents, organize my chapters a certain way, and then take care of all the other details that she was handling for me. And so she did an amazing job with that aspect. And then she was sort of the secondary editor to the first editor that read through all 100 of the stories. And my friends, I carved up the stories into 30-ish a piece to have them read through again after the first round of editing took place. Mm-hmm. So everything was really clean. So when I gave it to my sort of editor publisher, it was in a really good shape, so that there wasn't a lot of time that she was spending cleaning stuff up, and because she was getting paid by the hour. So I didn't want her to be running with all this extra work she had to do. So the editing part is really important, and it's something I like to do, and you can't really do it yourself. So I really plead with people to make sure that you find somebody that can edit your work, but you also have to be really comfortable with that editor. It's almost like you're dating that editor. So you have to get along with them well, because they have to get your style, and you want to keep your voice for how you're writing. So you don't want them to tweak it so much that when you reread your work that's been edited, you go, that doesn't sound like me.
Yeah.
And because I write in my voice, I really needed somebody that got that and understood that. So I interviewed a few people to make sure that that was the case. And I found somebody.
Yeah.
But that, I really think that that's important. And that's not something that I understood, but that I'm passing along to people. And in the process itself of going from, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to publish a book, to coming out with that book and receiving in the mail your box of your books, can take any different amounts of time. And it depends on how aggressive, and also what the purpose for your timeline is, whether it's an aggressive timeline. So I think from the point that I decided to publish a book to the time that I had the book in hand was probably about 3 months. That's really aggressive.
Yeah.
In terms of, okay, my content's been written. So written content to book in hand, probably about 3 months, maybe a little shorter than that. And my editors didn't love that, but I was just pushing them because I had this artificial timeline or deadline in my mind that I had to have the book out by. And it wasn't anybody saying that I had to, but in my mind, I sort of then thought, okay, then there are going to be these other steps that I need to do once I bring the book out. But really the book for me was to, my why in terms of the book was to serve as a virtual mentor for people, to be able to have a bigger platform, to be able to tell my story in a repeatable fashion and to reach more people. And also to establish credibility in terms of, I knew what I was talking about. And so I focused on topics that were, from the business world, and also from my 25 plus years of being a businesswoman executive, a working mom. So I have a lot of different topics that are going to cover a number of different areas for people. So I really, I stress to people, think about, like, why do you want to bring out this book? What is it going to do? Is it just because you want to have a legacy of having a book with your name on it? Some of that was maybe thought about after the fact. That wasn't initially what I thought about, but that was maybe part of it. That's a long answer to your question.
No, it was a great answer to the question. And you touched on a few things that I want to bring up and circle back to. And one of them is at the very beginning where you said you just do one pass, because that is, I think, unique. I mean, one of the first things that I had to tackle myself was that, if I did it in front of the computer, I just kept editing the same page over and over again. It was never good enough. And then I'd get it down to page 3 and I'd say, oh, I have to go back to page 1 and change that other thing now. And, you can spend a lot of time in the first 10 pages,
And never get anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And I eventually had to do a longhand, because otherwise I was just, because it was on the computer, I had a real trouble not editing it. So I think we all have to find our own way around that.
Well, that's just it. And I also will tell people in terms of, people will ask me, do I have a particular writing method? And yes, I do. I don't put a lot of pressure on myself. I had to for the first book, which really ended up being 2 books, because my editor, I was pushing them so hard that they could only do 50 stories in the first book. So I was like, all right, well, I've got my second book then.
Right.
And but you have to find, when you're writing, the right time to write, or you have to carve out time and be really disciplined with your writing, or at least I found that I had to be, because discipline is something that is hard, I think, for most people. So I decided that what I would do is I would write on Saturday mornings at between 9 to 11, and usually I'll write for about an hour and I'll crank out one story. So I just literally wrote my 266th story this past weekend, which is putting me into book 6. as of January. So,
Wow,
um,
impressive.
but but don't make it like an arduous thing, and don't feel as if you have to have a special like time to like bring this book out. I mean, maybe you do, but don't drive yourself crazy in terms of birthing this book, because it takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort.
Yeah, that's for sure. And you're right. I find that, after writing for a little while, I just kind of get into the zone and it just comes and it's much easier. But it's hard to do that if you're not giving yourself a specific amount of time, because then you just like, or if you're interrupted all the time, you can't get into that place where the words are just kind of flowing.
Yes, it's funny you should talk about the interruptions. So I was writing last weekend and my husband kept coming in. And I finally said to him, I'm like writing, can you stop? You keep interrupting my flow. And I went back and read my story, and I could tell like when the interruptions were happening because the flow is so off. So the other thing that I do, and I'll share this with people, is that I find music that has a particular beat that really is up, like sort of tempo, I guess that might be how you describe it. And that really motivates me, almost kind of like dance music potentially, but that works for me. I mean, it could be that classical music works better for some people. I guess maybe it depends on your genre, but like dance music, you would think that I'm at some dance club or something. If you hear the sound of the music and I'm writing, you might not think that I'm actually writing, but I am. But I get into that zone.
Yeah.
And when I was in the process of thinking that I was going to bring my first book out and that I had to have those 100 pages written, I did actually go away. I traveled. I had the benefit of traveling, and I cranked out probably about 30 stories within 2 weeks. So that's 30 weeks of work within 2 weeks that I cranked out. And I was writing on average about like 4 stories a day, which was hard. But what I'll tell people is that one of my particular secrets, just based on the style of writing that I do also, is that I'll queue up ideas so that I'm not scratching my head when I'm sitting in front of the computer going, what am I going to write about? Or I'll ask people. I like to ask people, so what are some topics that are of interest to you that you want to learn more about? And
Yeah.
so I source my content sometimes from various different places.
That's the way to do it though, because if you can sit down with an idea and you just keep expanding on it, it's so much easier.
It is, it is. And with some topics, I'll do a little bit of research, but most of my writing is all from in my brain and what I've been experiencing over the last, number of decades.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's so important that the editor doesn't take away your personality, because that's such a big part of what you're sharing.
Exactly. It's my brand. It's really who I am. It's the essence of it. And when I was asked would I consider doing an audio version of my books, I said I would, but I said I would have to commit to it being in my voice, because it is my voice, and it would almost seem strange if somebody else were to be reading it. It wouldn't be authentic, especially if I had a gentleman reading it. It would have to be a woman's voice. You know what I mean? It just wouldn't be right.
With a Australian accent.
Exactly. It actually might sound nice though. Maybe I'll give that some second thought.
Yeah. Experiment with that. Maybe you can write the next book in his voice.
That's right, exactly. I'll take on
Experiment with that. Well,
exactly.
that's fun. Congratulations. 6 books. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, there's an event coming up that we can talk about later called Blogs, Books, and Beyond. It's
Oh,
coming up
wow.
in June. And yeah, if you'd like to speak on that, I think we would love to have you,
I
talk about the writing process or anything like that.
I'd be delighted to, because I've taken my content into sort of different areas. So I leverage it for a TV show that I have, and I just recorded my 27th show, and it's called Murphy Unfiltered. And so my original intent when I queued up to do my TV show, which I of course didn't expect to be doing, I expected just to be doing, this is like the story of my life. I approached the local TV cable station and said, I'm thinking about doing a podcast, and I heard that you have some equipment that I might be able to use, and maybe you can help me with some of the editing. And they said, Well, we could, but we're really set up as a TV studio. So would you consider doing your blog as a TV show instead? And I thought, I guess.
What fun.
And yeah, so that's another area that I launched into. And so I've leveraged my content that I've written, and I have a guest host who is someone that I work with. I used to work with him, and so we kind of do point counterpoint on the topics to make it fun. And he was on the sales side of the business, and I was on the marketing side of the business. So we sort of take turns in terms of giving content perspective based on each of our respective areas of former discipline. Well, he's still in sales.
That sounds great. So it's Murph and E Unfiltered.
Yes. Yeah. It's on YouTube. You can find, I'm queuing up the other shows. I think I've got about a dozen of them are on there already. I need to get the rest of them up there. So I'm working on that. I have somebody helping me with that right now.
Great. Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
So now I'm curious, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who's curious about how you went from, you've got that 25 years in a more secure, what we think of as more secure type of position. Right. And then you just sort of took a leap to do something totally different. How did that all come about?
Well, I finally think I hit a wall where I had been toying around with the idea of being an entrepreneur for a while. And I finally got to the point where I was working at a tech company. At that one probably would have been my 10th one or something. I kind of lost track of how many I was at. But with one exception of the tech companies that I worked for, which was Hitachi, every single one of them was getting set up to be sold. So I was always in a position where the company was going to get sold. And the last company I worked for, they sold for about 650 million. And I was tired. I said, you know what? I'm really tired of building up companies for other people. I want to try to do this for myself. And I've got to figure out how to go about doing that. So I kind of had some conversations with myself, and I talked to my husband and said, who had been an entrepreneur for many years. And then after 20 years, he actually did something the reverse of that and went to go try out what it would be like to work in a corporation. And he spent 8 years and just kind of wound down on that particular adventure. But he said, yeah, why don't you give that a try, and I'll give you whatever support you need in order to make that happen. So I came up with the semblance of a business plan and sort of figured out what I needed to do in order to pivot from being a full-time executive with a full-time salary to screeching breaks, like zero, coming in and sorting out, okay, well, how am I going to take my experience and what am I going to do with it? So I decided that I needed to first gain some credibility, and I went out and I became a certified coach through Gallup because I loved that process and the understanding of what that means to be a coach and how you can help people. And I figured I needed some kind of foundation to work from that would help me there. But then I thought, well, I need to differentiate myself from other people that are out there, a lot of coaches. That's when sort of the advent of writing the book came into effect, and I was contracting on the side as I was pivoting to become an entrepreneur, and met that young man who was the one that encouraged me to write my book and then all the other books from there. And then I thought, well, I should probably think about other ways that I can leverage my content and make money talking about potentially my experience. So I started investigating ways that I could put myself out there as a professional speaker, and talk to some friends that had gone down that path, and they made recommendations in terms of how to go about doing that. So one thing led to the other, and you sort of build up momentum and steam from doing that. And the hardest thing is to convince the first person to let you do that. And so I'll never forget that first experience that I had where I did the public speaking for an organization. I got paid for it. It was just so exciting. And once you have that, it kind of opens up a lot of other doors for you. It's just, you have to be really creative and tenacious and just confident in yourself that it will happen. But that was just another stream of revenue for me from my perspective. Then I wanted to look at, well, I've been constantly creating content my whole life. What if I were to create some courses or workshops? Would anybody be interested in that? And then so I started creating workshops based on the content that I had crafted. And lo and behold, there were people that were interested in having me come in to do workshops on particular topics to help them. And so that was another sort of stream of business. So I started sort of compartmentalizing my business and looking at having different streams of revenue coming in addition to doing the coaching, the one-on-one coaching or coaching of teams, both sports teams as well as corporate teams, and working with C-level executives to help them with coaching as well. And so I really looked at it almost as if it was a puzzle that I had to figure out in terms of, okay, what's this end puzzle going to look like? What do I want it to look like? And then I had to start sort of crafting that puzzle myself in terms of being able to put it together and to articulate to people what it was going to look like and why they should hire me.
No, and that's a classic model that works so well. And I think a lot of people wish they could, fall into it or create it the way you've created yours. But you brought up an excellent point, and there are a lot of things I want to talk to you about, and we're not going to have time to do it, unfortunately. So I hope that you'll come back in the future. But
I'd love to.
Excellent. But for today, you brought up the confidence, and I would want to touch on that. I hope you just tell us, like, is there a way, like, that's what so many people suffer with, that's their biggest challenge, is that, somewhere deep down inside, they know that they're really smart, or they know that they know a lot about their topic. But when it comes time to project that to someone else, and that someone else is going to feel that and believe that they are good at what they do, it comes down to your own self-confidence. Is there a way to increase that, or at least to increase the illusion of it?
It's funny you should ask, because I get asked that quite regularly. And what I can tell people is that most people that interact with me, they by some default end up finding out what their top 5 strengths are, because I am a firm believer in that once you know what your top 5 strengths are, you can do a lot with that. And that's going to give you sort of a natural foundation for your confidence, because those are talents that you've had since you were quite small and that you can do a lot with. Now I'm in the process of figuring out which learning platform I'm going to leverage, but I've created a course, an online course that I'm going to be promoting. I've got to actually get it onto a platform, but it's all about helping people with confidence, whether you're 14 years old or whether you're, 82 years old, it doesn't matter. Everybody who might need a little extra confidence could benefit from the crafting of how I've staged into 4 different categories, how to go from week to week in terms of getting you to a whole different place of your confidence level. So yes, it's possible. And I've thought about it very kind of, if you will, systematically, in terms of helping somebody to know how to go from here to there, to, stepping them through the process, but also coaching them along the way in a group sort of setting, to make it so that it's accessible to lots of different people.
That's wonderful. I know that's going to be so helpful for people, because that's always the big question. What I've been told is, to increase your self-confidence, you set a goal and you achieve it, and you set a goal and you achieve it. And then eventually you begin to feel self-confident because you know that you can accomplish things. But
yeah, interestingly though, so I don't have competition in my top 10. I have achiever, but it's in my top 10, it's lower. So I'm not motivated by goals necessarily. So you think, well, what is she motivated by if she's not motivated by goals, right? So I am motivated by other things. And so you have to figure out what it is that motivates you now, because not everyone's certainly going to be like me. More people will likely be motivated by knowing, okay, I got to tick these things off. And by doing that, I'll be achieving, and that will make me feel better, and that will increase my confidence, but not always, you know? So if I was on a sales team, and there were contests that I was supposed to be involved in, that would not motivate me or make me feel more confident by entering into these contests to compete with other people. So
Yeah.
it's a matter of figuring out, like, it goes back to something I said earlier in terms of knowing what makes you tick, is really critical to help you to identify what's going to help you to boost up your confidence levels.
Yeah, and I would think too, having that assessment, because I think many of us have this situation where we think that everybody is good at the things we're good at,
That's
but
right.
other people are also good at other stuff that we're not good at. So then we think, well, they're just so much better off than I am because whatever, you know. So once you find out that, oh, these strengths are different than other people's strengths, other people don't like just naturally be able to do these things. Oh, wow. And that can actually just in itself, right, could help with your self-confidence level.
Oh, without a doubt. And it's funny because most people find out that they actually look at their strengths and use them against themselves, because they think that because they do these things so easily that they couldn't possibly be talents or strengths. And that, to your point, that yes, everybody is doing these things because this is so easy. Of course, everyone is capable of doing this. And I have to constantly tell people that no, that's not the case. Your strengths are really cool and they're unique to you, and not everybody has them.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. What a gift you're giving people by helping them to learn about themselves, right? Self-knowledge is so key to self-acceptance and happiness and, you know, self-confidence. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. I like to tell people to leave them with sort of a visual in terms of what I do. Is I consider myself to be a people diamond polisher, and everyone has these facets, and I come in and I help to shine their facets, to make them shine. And that's what I love doing. That's my passion.
That's a great vision. So Kathy, tell us, you know, how can people reach out to you if they want to learn more, if they want to get their family galloped?
Exactly. So they can reach out to me. I've got a website, which is marketme2.net. And they can reach me there, or they can reach me by way of email at Kathy, KATHY, MURPHY at me.com. Kathy Murphy at me.com is another good way to reach me. And those are two probably the best ways to reach me these days.
All right, great. Thank you. And all those links and all the information about reaching Kathy are going to be in the show notes wherever you are watching or listening to the podcast. And they'll also be on the website, getyourfillpodcast.com. Kathy, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this really cool. Now you've educated people to this idea of Gallup, and I know they're all going to want to go out and get the test. So how do they get the Gallup test?
So they can get it on their own, and go to the Gallup site and look for the top 5 strengths. But if they come to me, I can get them also their own unique code. They'd go into my portal so I can see what their strengths are. And then if there's anybody that's listening to this that takes advantage of it, I will offer to them a free hour of coaching them on their strengths if they come to me and ask for me to provide them with a code that costs $20.66 is the tax.
In full disclosure, it's not just $20.
Yeah, sorry, it's a little few extra cents.
Oh, that's a really generous offer, Kathy, because it's right. You can look at them and say, okay, that's nice. What does that all mean? And that's really where people are going to need to.
Exactly. I can give them some really different insight that they're going to be able to take some tremendous value from.
Excellent. I'm going to do that, Kathy. I hope you don't mind if I do.
Please.
Do that too.
Please do.
Excellent. And afterwards, I'll give everybody some more details about blogs, books, and beyond, the virtual event coming up in June. But for now, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Kathy, for being here. And I know you have a choice of over 2 million podcasts, and I'm very happy and grateful that you made it to the end of this one. And see you next week with more excellent and informative folks.